Thank you. Good evening, comrades. Good evening, comrades. Thank you. My name is Mwelela Cele. I'm the co-director of public programs at the Forge. I'm also the researcher at Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. On behalf of the Forge, Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, the Commune, Inkani Books, I welcome you to the launch of Washington Bullets by Comrade Vijay Prashad. This is an online launch as well as an in-person launch. Welcome to the Commune, a radical bookshop in Johannesburg. And thank you very much for attending the launch. As I welcome and greet you, I also welcome Comrade Vijay Prashad, who's joining us online. Comrade Vijay Prashad is the Executive Director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. He is also the Chief Editor of Left-Wing Books, and of course, the author of the book that we are launching today. And he has written many other books, 30 books altogether. So as I greet you all and greet Comrade Vijay Prashad, I also greet Comrade Naeem Jina. Comrade Naeem Jina is the Executive Director of the Afro-Middle East Center. Comrade Naeem Jina is going to be the discussant today as we are launching the book that we are launching. Thank you, Comrade, for accepting our invitation to be the discussant. Much appreciation. And also, as we are launching Washington Bullets, simultaneously, we are also introducing Inkani Books. This is a new publishing project or company that we are introducing here in South Africa, connected to Tricontinental. Connected to Tricontinental and an imprint of Left-Wing Books. But my colleague, Efemia Chela, the editor of Inkani Books, will tell you more about Inkani Books. And also Efemia today will facilitate this discussion and run the whole discussion. So thank you, Efemia, for everything today. Much appreciation. Before I sit down, I just want to say something briefly. I just want to express condolences to our comrades in Durban, abahlali basemjondolo social movement. Last week, Tuesday, our comrade Ayandangila was brutally assassinated in Durban. A young man, the deputy chairperson of a Kanana commune. So today, on behalf of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, on behalf of the Forge, on behalf of the commune, and other projects connected to us like Pan Africa Today, we are expressing condolences to Abahlali basemjondolo. We are also expressing condolences to his family in Durban and in Port St. John's in the Eastern Cape. Sithi sikanye nabo, sikhala kanye nabo. Umngcwabo wakhe uzobu ngale weekend. So ngalawo mazwi nje bengifuna ukuthi ngithathe lelo thuba ngidlulise ukuzolana nomndeni nama comrades ethu. So thank you very much, comrades. Please enjoy the launch. Much appreciation.
Thank you so much, Mwelela, for that wonderful opening. As he mentioned, I'm Efemia Chela. I'm the editor of Inkani Books, and I also work for Tricontinental. Our format today is going to be a little bit of a talk by Vijay, and then I'm sure a very well-considered response by Naeem, and then we'll open the floor for questions, comments, discussion, that sort of thing. So a little bit more about Vijay, who's coming to from us all the way from I don't know where he's coming to us from. Massachusetts, maybe? I don't know. Secret location overseas. Let's keep it safe. Secret location overseas. Vijay is a historian, journalist, and Marxist intellectual. As Malala mentioned, he is the director of Tricontinental, chief correspondent at Globetrotter, and senior fellow at Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies, which is part of Renmin University in China. He holds advanced degrees from Pomona College and the University of Chicago. He has written over 30 books and will be speaking us tonight about Washington Bullets. Take it away, Vijay.
It's a great honor to be with you. I so much in offering our great condolences to our comrades at Abaklali for their loss and the attacks on them. In fact, in this time of intensified instability in the world, there are so many where to begin. But people, one knows, it falls harder on your soul to have to walk along as they part. Thanks to Efemia for taking the lead in producing this book, and of course launching Inkani Books. It's really a pleasure to be part of pushing forward a left publishing venture in South Africa, and I hope this, with Leftward in Delhi and other publishing houses, we are able to, make a dent in the battle of ideas against the toxicity of so much of thought in our time, where, there is really a refusal to think about what's going on. And there is a demand upon us to take lazy positions about difficult things. Really very grateful that you produced this book. I'm very, very happy, and it was extremely moving to read the afterword written by my friend and comrade Richard Pitthouse, and just ignore the rest of the book, just read his extremely thoughtful afterword. You'll get much more from it than from the book. So thanks a lot for all of that, and it's a really beautiful book, so I'm really grateful. Before I get into talking about the themes in the book, I want to explain something. In recent times, I decided that there's a kind of, I think maybe it's unfairness in the way publishers and writers and reviewers and so on have dealt with the question of reading. There's people say, well, nobody reads, and there are these sorts of comments one hears. And at Leftward in Delhi and in other places, we've been thinking a lot about how do people read, rather than whether they read or whether they don't read, that kind of thing. How do people read? And it's actually interesting because people do a lot of reading. Let's say they read on social media, they read Facebook posts and this, that, and the other. And I just want to say that the form of the book, and the reason it's so slim, is I've tried to produce a book about complicated things, but in a form which I hope will find readers who read, but don't necessarily read in the way somebody read in the 19th century. Time is different, energy is different, the time to read is different, concentrations are different, and so on. So that's one of the reasons, just to sort of excuse myself for writing a slim book, that this was quite intentional, to reach a certain kind of readership that can read, study, and find out more if need be. Okay, this book itself. Well, in October 2019, I got a phone call from some people in Bolivia saying that, there's going to be a coup against the government of Evo Morales. Now, it's important to remember that Bolivia used to be a wretchedly poor country and, exploited to the hilt. In fact, it became a haven for many of the actual Nazis from Europe, including Klaus Barbie, who ran the security services of the Bolivian oligarchy, a really ruthless state project. The indigenous people of the country kept down by the heel of the settler foot. Here again, shoes polished and tied by these Nazis that came from Europe in the 1950s. Evo Morales was a coca farmer. He was a leader of the Coca Farmers Union, a very significant trade union movement in Bolivia. He was part of the formation that fought off the privatization of water in Cochabamba, the legendary fight, the water wars of Cochabamba. Also part of the gas wars in Bolivia, where they fought off the privatization of gas. And eventually, Morales led the movement to socialism to victory. For 14 years, movement to socialism humanized the relationship of the Bolivian state with the people of Bolivia. But at the same time, put a lot of pressure on mainly Western, Canadian, and US-based mining companies that had previously essentially treated Bolivia like a doormat, or not even like a doormat, like a mine. There were no people there, just a mine. Morales reversed some of that. It was not a perfect government, but in 14 years, social indicators improved, incredible improvement. He was also one of the first indigenous heads of government in South America. An extraordinary person, Evo Morales. Well, I got this phone call that there was going to be a coup. I called Noam Chomsky. We released a statement immediately. The statement was published widely in South America, including in Bolivia. Of course, I'm just telling you this because I'm telling you that I was very involved in this from the beginning. And nonetheless, there was a mutiny in the police force in Bolivia. Morales refused to leave office. The exact issue that they raised was that there was fraud in the fourth election campaign that he led movement to socialism into. He had won the third election campaign some years previously. Remember, this is October 2019. His term would have ended, the third term, in January 2020. Nonetheless, in early November 2019, General Williams Kaliman, trained in the United States, went into Evo Morales' office and told him, get out of town. Evo was scared for his movement, worried about the retribution and violence that might take place because there were pro-neo-Nazi groups in Santa Clara up there in that part of the country, which were already on the streets. There was a real sense of danger, and Evo decided for the sake of the country, he left. Now, at that point, liberals should have been up in arms around the world because his third term didn't end till January 2020. Nonetheless, he was removed in November 2019, took refuge initially in Mexico and then in Argentina. What surprised me was, despite the fact that this was a coup, even on liberal standards, forget any other standard, it was a coup against the constitution. What surprised me, despite the fact that these neo-Nazis came into the government, including a Christian fundamentalist by the name of Jeanette Áñez, who attacked directly every indigenous symbol, including the great flag of the indigenous rebellion called the Wifala. They removed it from all government offices. There were burnings of the Wifala. Leaders of the mass were beaten on the streets. People were killed. There were 2 documented massacres. Despite all that, large numbers of people, particularly in North America and Europe, but also in other parts of the world, said there was no coup. They said Evo Morales had become authoritarian and he had overstayed his welcome. Interesting comment, because Evo Morales was in office less than Angela Merkel. Nobody seemed to be saying she had overstayed her welcome. But this first indigenous leader of South America was told, you've overstayed your welcome. You've been there too long. Time for you to leave. Interesting that these comments were coming not from the State Department in the United States, not necessarily from the White House. They were coming also from so-called liberal left and left commentators. And I was surprised by this because I felt there's extremely poor literacy about the nature of the way United States utilizes its power. Are we now going to say there was no coup against Aristide? Are we now going to say that there was no coup in Honduras against Mel Zelaya in 2009? Are we also now saying there was no coup in Ukraine in 2014, etc.? Let's set Ukraine aside because I know people have strong feelings about the Russian war, and I don't want to get into that. But I want to talk about the fact that there was this really limited understanding of what happened in Bolivia. I spent about a month and a half, the winter of 2019-2020, super annoyed by that reaction. And I wrote this book. I wrote this book almost, and you know, if I was a taker of those kind of drugs, it was almost like I'd taken Benzedrine or one of, I don't even know what I'm talking about, but one of those things that would have kept you up all night. I couldn't sleep. I really wrote this in absolute, fast pace. And I sent the book to Morales to read. He was then in Argentina. He read a translation of it and he wrote the opening section to it. In the opening section, he said the people will prevail. This was written, I think, in March or April of 2020. A year later, the people of Bolivia voted out the coup regime of Janet Áñez and voted back in the movement to socialism. To the credit of Evo Morales, he did not participate as a candidate in that election. But everybody from his administration was in that campaign. And they won, they triumphed, and they are now back in government in Bolivia. It's an extraordinary story of the resilience of people when they struggle, when they believe in a project and so on. But underneath everything was the coup. And the fact that people have forgotten that these things are manufactured and that they're extremely dangerous. Well, what I decided to do, and I'm not going to take too long, but what I decided to do was I decided to look at the coup in Guatemala, the coup against Jacob Arbenz, 1954. I spent a life as a reporter talking to, I covered the war in Syria, the war in Iraq before that, the war in Libya and so on. When you cover these wars, firstly, very little is gained in the battlefield. It's hard for a reporter to understand what's happening. It's really difficult to write a good battlefield report, and I'm sympathetic to all of my colleagues who go into those situations because it is hard to write from that context. And what happens then is that you come back, like in Baghdad, you come back to the Hotel Palestine and you sit around and talk to other journalists and you run into intelligence agents because they're all over the place trying to influence the narrative. The CIA has a lot of people who hang around these cafes and talk to journalists and try to move a narrative. I befriended a number of them, including one of them who played a big role for me in thinking about this book. While I was doing all this reporting, I discovered that in Afghanistan in 1979, a US ambassador was assassinated or murdered. His name was Adolf Dubs. Nobody knows much about Dubs. I'd started while reporting on the wars of the 2000s, I started investigating who killed Dubs, and I began to go around asking questions. Well, this particular guy, Chuck Cogan, who was head of the CIA's Directorate of Operations based in Tehran in the time before the Iranian Revolution, he contacted me and he called me to meet him in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I flew in and I saw him, spent a couple of days talking to Cogan. And Cogan told me, don't mess around with the Dubs story. He says it's bad for your health. These guys, it's always scary talking to them because they almost talk as if they have like a gun trained at your head. He said, it's bad for your health to go after the Dubs story. He said, what else do you want to know? So I asked him about Guatemala and, coups where the material is all available now. And he was super illuminating for me. I learned a lot. The reason I picked Guatemala to emphasize in the second section of this book which is called a manual for regime change, is because all the material is from the US government. There is no supposition, there's no fantasy, it's all their own stuff, whatever they said. Occasionally I draw from the coup in Iran in 53, the coup against Mohammad Mossadegh, the coup also against Chedi Jagan in Guyana in the 1950s. So I draw from some material, but in the manual on regime change, it's all CIA material or interviews with CIA agents. Nobody speculating, no conspiracy theories, nothing. It's what they say. And also what's verified based on what they say, because they could be exaggerating. Well, I decided as a primer for militants and activists and those who would like to learn how a coup happens, to construct, to reverse engineer, how coups take place, to take their own narrative of the coup and then reverse engineer. How did you do it? Well, that was the manual of regime change. It comes in 9 chapters. That's the heart of this book. It tries to explore how the US government or the CIA or its various agencies produces a coup, including building public support, including cultivating the military, including having what I call the right man on the ground, often the ambassador, but not always the ambassador. And there are a group of ambassadors who play a key role here. I'm going to come to an end now, Efemia, but in ending, I want to say the following. There were 3 coups that devastated the politics of the global South. 3 very important coups. I don't emphasize them, but I want to put them on the table. There's a terrific new book by Susan Williams called White Malice, which is about the coup against Lumumba and the movement in the Congo, 1961, and the coup against Nkrumah in 66. The book is nice because it connects these 2 coups. The 3 coups of incredible importance for putting our movements on the back foot in the global South. The first was the coup against the people of the Congo, 1961, Lumumba. Related to that, the coup against Nkrumah, 1966. This really demoralized a lot of the movements on the continent, set people back a very long time. And these coups and assassinations in Africa have been punctual. Look at it. I mean, just as South Africa emerging out of the wretched period of apartheid, one of the standard bearers of the working class, Chris Hani, is assassinated right then, right at the moment of the transition. In Tunisia, right at the moment of the transition in 2011, Chokri Beled, the leader of the Tunisian working class, assassinated right at the moment of transition. These 2, in a way, in the north and south of the continent, bookend the way in which these assassinations operate to demoralize movements, to help us, these examples help us understand what happens when an individual is killed and how movements can be demoralized. But as I said, I'm starting with 3 coups. The first is Lumumba in the Congo, again repeated in Africa in 1987 in the killing of Thomas Sankara and the coup against the government of Burkina Faso. So the first is the Lumumba coup, which is then repeated in 87 with Sankara. The second coup is in Brazil, the largest country in South America, one of the most influential in the region. There was a coup in 1964, which lasted 21 years, that coup regime. And that coup regime sets in motion a range of coups in Argentina, in Chile, the coup against Salvador Allende, coups in Paraguay, and so on. A generation lives through coup governments in South America. When the coup took place in Brazil, US warships were off the coast of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro to get rid of a left-leaning government. That's the second coup. The first is Lumumba. The second is the coup that lasts 21 years in 1964 in Brazil. And the third coup, very important for Asia, is the coup in Indonesia in 1965, where 1 million people of the left were killed in weeks thereafter. Faxes came in from Australian intelligence to the Indonesian military, informing them who they should go and arrest and kill. 1 million people killed, And nobody really found guilty for that, by the way. There's no justice for the million Indonesians killed there, and Sukarno's government overthrown in that coup. 3 coups, 3 continents, 3 sets of histories that were not allowed to take place. The book is called Washington Bullets because of a song by The Clash, which I like very much. But it's also called Washington Bullets because they don't play around. They are serious. They do this to their adversaries. If they don't kill you, they defame you and they push you out of the way. I don't think we should be naive about the way imperialist power works. I think there is a segment in our movements that just doesn't appreciate the viciousness with which these forces operate. I'm glad Richard focused on Haiti in the afterword that he wrote, because that's a tragedy and a half. That is a crime. That's a crime against humanity. What was done to Haiti from 1804 after the revolution right to the present, twice coupping Jean-Bertrand Aristide, twice, not once, but twice. That's the nature of power in the world. Power isn't everywhere. It's not diffuse. There are these densities of power, and these densities of power can be vicious. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Vijay, for the series of provocations. It really helps to situate us in the world of your book and also how it connects to us here as well. I'd like to move over to our lovely discussant, Naeem Jina. Naeem Jina is a political analyst, activist, and scholar. He was integral to the Muslim youth movement of South Africa during the anti-apartheid struggle, and he has published numerous articles on the Middle East and North Africa and geopolitics. He's the author of several books, including Journey of Discovery, A South African Hajj, and Pretending Democracy, Israel, an Ethnocratic State. Naeem is the executive director of the Afro-Middle East Center, and I'm sure we're all waiting with bated breath to hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much. You're too kind with that introduction. I'm going to, I wanted to make this point later in what I say, but I'm going to start with this point, Vijay, because you referred to, towards the end of what you said, you mentioned that these people are vicious and quite brutal. So I just want to quote this from the book. In the CIA files on Guatemala, and I'm going to talk a little more about Guatemala, is a chilling 19-page document with a simple title. This is not newspaper articles, this is not anarchist material, this is from the CIA. The title is A Study of Assassination. Quote, "No assassination instruction should ever be written or recorded. Decisions must be made in the field and kept there." It lists, the book lists a number of tools that can be used in an assassination, such as hammers, kitchen knives. Quote, "Anything hard, heavy, and handy will suffice." Absolute reliability, another quote, "Absolute reliability is obtained by severing the spinal cord in the cervical region," which the book says can be done with a knife. "Persons," quote, "who are squeamish should not attempt it." This is a manual that was produced in order to teach people how to commit assassinations. And assassinations is the 8th point in this manual for regime change that Vijay speaks about. Vijay, you didn't do it, I'm going to do it, so thanks for leaving that out. But it's very instructive, this section of the book, Washington Bullets, where Vijay speaks about these 9 chapters in the manual for regime change. I'll just go through the chapter headings, and almost every single chapter heading is a quote from some or other CIA or State Department document. Number 1, lobby public opinion. Vijay puts public in quotes. Number 2, appoint the right men on the ground. Number 3, that's CIA officers, ambassadors, etc., to make sure that they are able to exert the necessary pressure on whoever the president is or whichever general they want to buy, etc. Number 3, make sure the generals are ready, because no coup can succeed without that. Number 4, make the economy scream. This too is a quote. Number 5, diplomatic isolation. Number 6, organize mass protests. Number 7, give the green light. Number 8, a study of assassinations. And number 9, deny. These now, I mean, think back to just the past few years. We don't have to go into the long history that Vijay does. Just the past decade, the color revolutions, all of these things that we have seen taking place. And think about how these 9 points fit into how those processes unfolded. And you'll see that they, as Vijay points out, that what Guatemala did, because this is related directly to Guatemala, what Guatemala did was provide the CIA essentially with a template that was then repeated numerous times in numerous other places. So what I wanted actually to start off by saying, Vijay, is that I think your book is a collection of a whole lot of conspiracy theories, except that every single conspiracy is pulled apart, argued, and shown from the documents, as you said, that they actually are conspiracies. They do exist. They did exist. They were executed in particular kinds of ways, very well thought out conspiracies. And so, you know, when we say often, and we're hearing, and I also don't want to get into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but I'm just making this point, that a lot has been said in the past couple of weeks about double standards in the media, commentators, and you know, all the racist stuff that has been said, etc. Double standards, it's actually not an accurate term, because in reality, it's a playbook that's unfolding quite consistently. It's not a double standard. This is how it is. Black people, for example, are not equal to white, blue-eyed, blonde-haired people. That's the reality. It's not a double standard to say that. That's how it is, as far as that narrative is concerned. So it's not a double standard. It plays out according to the playbook that already exists. What I also want to say, and my comments are not as coherent as Vijay's book or his earlier comments. These 9 points that I pointed out, this is the CIA playbook, the CIA manual. But when we look at this more carefully, we see that other mini dictators or sub-imperialists have used different aspects of the same playbook, not necessarily all 9 in the same order, but picking out here and there and using it quite effectively in many cases. Think of the number of dictators on our own continent and how some of these things play out. Think of how Middle East dictators have so effectively, after 2001, used the discourse of terrorism in order to demonize dissidents in their own countries, in order to demonize anyone that supports democracy or just basic freedom of expression. They have learned very well, in fact, from the CIA manual on how to suppress dissent and how to prevent their regime from being changed into something that is more democratic. And so we must look at this, and I want to make this point here. When we look at our own dictators, and I say that tongue-in-cheek, but I'm talking about our continent and in the global south, we are sometimes a bit clouded in our judgment by our sense of, number one, our sense of romanticism, and number two, our sense of who we hate. Because of who we hate, we start to love people that we shouldn't be. That often happens. And I think that we need to be very careful about this. In their own countries, these people who we sometimes express great love for commit massacres, they torture people, they arrest people and detain them for decades, not years, decades, without charge. They disappear people, they've leveled entire towns, and simply because they are also hated by the United States doesn't mean that they are good people necessarily. So I said that my comments are not very coherent, and so just remember that. I want to pick up on one aspect that Vijay points to very, very briefly in the book. He speaks a little about Catholics, and particularly a tension among Catholics. The one part of the tension, of course, is liberation theology in Latin America, and the other part of the tension is the Catholic Church and how it sought to demonize that liberation theology. And then he speaks about Muslims in terms of particularly the Saudi structures created at the behest of the United States, and how they sought to undermine anti-imperialist narratives within their own context. I just want to put a slightly different spin to it. And let me, as a disclaimer, say that number one, I'm a Muslim. Number two, I'm the deputy chair of an organization called Dennis Hurley Peace Institute, which is a Catholic organization. So both of these parts are kind of relevant to me. I think while everything that Vijay says there is absolutely correct, and of course he wasn't meaning to go into this point, so it's not like he left this out. But we on the left, we need to also look at the opportunities in this scenario. And the opportunities being that within both of those communities, and let me not say Catholic, but broader Christian communities, Muslim communities, and perhaps this can be extended to other religious communities too. There are strands of liberation narratives that in fact in some cases approximate kind of leftist ideas and leftist ideals. Even you would find in Muslim, if we call it liberation theology, some people talking about classless societies. The possible alliances between the left and these strands, I think, are something that we haven't adequately exploited. And I make this point particularly in a world we live in, and we in South Africa don't really feel this much, so we don't know much about it. But in a world where racism and Islamophobia have become so conjoined, that, you know, one of the big attacks against people of the global South is Islamophobia. And here, that's why I say this is an opportunity for a meeting of forces to create new liberation projects for ourselves. Another point I want to make, and I'm sure I'm running out of time. Yeah?
No, keep going, please.
You know, as I was reading this and thinking about the United States in particular, because that's what the book is mainly talking about. And I must say, comrades who haven't seen the book yet, the book is not just about Guatemala. It's not just about Latin America. When I looked at the book, Vijay, I thought, this is quite a slim novel. Okay, I mean, a slim book. Okay, so I guess it's, you know, very focused. And then I started reading it, and then I said, okay, this looks like it's very kind of journalistic. This is my academic arrogance coming out. And then as I got into it, the breadth of what is covered in the book, from Iran and Mossadegh to Sankara to a whole lot on Latin America, you know, a whole wide spectrum that I think is quite, and you can read through it very speedily, which is, as Vijay says, the objective of the book, extremely useful in what it covers and the educational value of that, apart from unraveling the conspiracies, as I said earlier on. But as I read through the book, I wondered to myself, you know, it's easy and perhaps a bit lazy to suggest that all the American attacks on governments, on people, etc., are because they, in the past, we might have said anti-communist. More recently, we might have said anti-leftist. But none of these adequately explains why. And so I thought to myself, you know, it's like asking yourself the question, why does Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos want more money? It makes no sense. I mean, they could live a millennium each multiple times and they won't be able to finish the money they have. Why do they have to exploit Amazon workers and make more money, right? The same kind of question you ask about the United States. Why does it have to continue? There's no communist threat anymore. Why does it continue in the way that it did then, now even? Is it explained by an anti-communism? No, that's not sufficient. Is it explained by an anti-leftism? No, even that is, both together are not sufficient. Another line that comes in, and we see it in Guatemala and other parts of Latin America, the protection of multinational corporations. Yes, it's true, but even that is not sufficient. And so what is it? Why does it continue in this kind of way? Well, perhaps we should understand that this is the nature, in the Bezos and Musk case, this is the nature of capitalism. In this case, this is the nature of imperialism. It is never satisfied. It has to accumulate, in one case, capital, in the other case, power, continually. And it has to be in control of whatever power exists in whichever pockets of the world they exist. Let me give you a small example. The United States doesn't need to import gas. It virtually almost doesn't need to import oil anymore, okay? But in northern Syria, they control all the oil fields. Their proxies, called the Syrian Democratic Forces, mainly a conglomeration of Kurdish groups, control the oil resources and the oil wells there. Why, if they don't need it? Well, it's not for them. They're not exporting that from Syria to the United States. They're controlling it. It's about the control, it's about the power. They wield power over others because they control the oil, not because they need it. And so this gives another idea to this notion of greed, whether it's for money or for power. And I think that this is an important notion that we must keep in mind. But it also points to the kind of need for us not to be simplistic about imperialism. Why does the United States support Israel? No, it's not just because of the oil in the Middle East. I just explained something about the oil now, but it's because it's part of a racist project. Israel is a white, Western, quote-unquote, civilized outpost in the middle of barbarism. These, the Arab world or the Middle East. Israel is also a useful partner to do for the United States, and particularly for the CIA, what the United States laws don't allow it to do. For example, in Latin America. You can send in Israeli mercenaries and the Americans go to Senate and say, we didn't do anything. And then it's also American domestic politics that causes that. So it's multifaceted, and if we want to defeat it, we have to understand the multifaceted nature of it. Let me come to my last 2 points. All of this is extremely important in our understanding the world, but we also need to understand what it means for us today. This book, what does it mean for us today on the continent of Africa and in the country of South Africa? Okay? In the past 18 months, and you might have seen this last month in the African Union Heads of State Summit, virtually every head of state complained about the coups on the continent recently. We thought that we were moving in a democratic trajectory, and suddenly, in the past 18 months, we've had 8 coups or coup attempts in African countries, in 5 countries, 3 attempts in Burkina Faso, 3 in Mali, 1 in Guinea, 1 in Mauritania, 1 in Gambia. Every single one of these led by military officers trained by the United States of America. Every single one of them. Okay? And so you wonder, what does this mean for our continent? Is this another phase of the kinds of things that Vijay is talking about in this book? Where it played out in a particular kind of way in Latin America, but perhaps there's another playbook. Or is it the same playbook working in different ways? It also reminded me of, after the Palestinian Authority was formed, after Oslo, a number of the old fighters from the PLO were taken to Jordan and trained by an American general called Dayton, General Dayton. And they were referred to as Dayton's men. Okay, these security officers, these former fighters who were trained to be part of the Palestinian Authority security services. Dayton himself said, "I have created the new Palestinian man." Okay, about these officers that he trained. Are these generals that we're talking about in all these countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, Mauritania, Gambia, etc., are these also the new African man that we have to contend with? Is it part of the same kind of project? And so the question about what it means for us on this continent and in this country, I think is one that I can't answer, but I think is one that we need to consider very carefully. In our country, and I say this with a great degree of caution, because I don't want anyone to think that I'm being an apologist for the ANC or our government. We can have a discussion where we can slam both of them quite adequately and for very good reason. But the South African government and the ANC are viewed by the United States as a kind of maverick. Okay, it took a long time, for example, for them to get South Africa to agree to have joint military exercises between South Africa and AFRICOM, the United States Africa Command. South Africa, you know, when Mbeki was president, led the campaign to ensure that AFRICOM didn't have a base on the African continent. And so it's been based in Germany all the time. But during the Zuma presidency, we started having military exercises with them, okay? Yet, it's still seen as a maverick, because, for example, they demand that so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so South Africa should label as a terrorist, not give a passport to, etc., and the South Africans will refuse. Or say, we'll bring your evidence to court, knowing fully well, of course, that intelligence is not evidence that can be produced in court. And so South Africa is a big irritant for some sections of the American intelligence community in particular. But what that also means is that they have identified, and I'm not going to go into too much detail now, I want to end, they've identified where the soft spots are within the South African security terrain that are more amenable to receiving training, to receiving finance, to receiving intelligence, etc. While some sections are opposed to it, others are more amenable to it. What does that mean for us as a state? What does that mean for us as a people, as a nation that attempts to stand up against this and chart our own course? I think that kind of idea even is under great danger and great risk. And so let me end with the quote from the book that Vijay referred to. Not a quote from Vijay, sorry Vijay, but the last sentence of the preface by Evo Morales. And he says, "We have the confidence that we are the masses, and that in time, the masses will win." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naeem, for those radical insights and really bringing, you know, the message of Washington Bullets home for us as Africans living in a very contentious global system. I'd like to open up the floor to questions to our viewers online who are watching us from the comfort of their homes, where I'm sure it's much warmer, and also to our audience. I believe a young man in the back. Could we pass the mic to the back? Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's on. Thank you very much for the opportunity. So I've got a question for...
Sorry, could you tell us who you are?
Oh.
We'd like to know your name.
My name is Bongani Malinga.
Hi.
Hello. Hello, Bra Vijay. So my question to you is, so I suppose also it comes from where I'm at in terms of academic thinking, academic research and things like that, around reflexivity. So for some reason, when I saw your book, specifically also the title, I thought of, well, the author's name escapes me. The title is called The Secret Terrorists. And hearing you as you are speaking around what you are engaging with or dealing with, the themes, I'm wondering, so lately, for the longest while during the Trump presidency and post the Trump presidency, and specifically I'm thinking around the journalism as a profession, and I watch, well, my mother does, I watch as well, influenced by that. I watch CNN a lot, and I trace how the sort of like the differences between how they would report during the Trump presidency and how they're reporting now that it's Biden. So for me, and when you stated how the book came about, or what influenced or inspired the book, I'm wondering, do journalists, do you think, I'm not sure if you train journalists or you have younger journalists that you mentor. I'm wondering, because for some of us, and I'm not speaking just for myself, I'm speaking for individuals with whom I've had these conversations. Sometimes we literally, we distrust journalism as a profession, not as a whole, not that we're painting every one of you with the same brush, but because, again, referencing the differences between how reports were being made during the Trump presidency and the Biden presidency, and again now with the Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, and the blatant racism. How do you ensure that you are aware of when you come into a space as a journalist coming from a different country, and also coming into that particular space carrying privilege? How do you ensure that you literally look yourself, or rather you put yourself outside of yourself, to ensure that when you report, and when you analyze the material that you gather from the ground, you are able to literally take yourself outside of yourself and ensure that as you're reporting, it is not biased, it is not based solely on how you view your world? Because I mean, like, when we enter each and every space, we cannot not think of or bring in ourselves as well, and our experiences and our perspectives and our frameworks of the world. So that's, yeah, I'm just quite curious about that. Thank you.
So, Efemia, would you like me to talk about that?
Yes, please.
Okay, well, so yes, I've been a practicing journalist for about 3 decades, and I do teach classes on journalism, including, I've done it several times in South Africa, and I very much like having these conversations. There's a concept called mediation, which I find useful. The different levels that impinge on one as you come up with ideas and so on. Any reporter who goes to write a story, it doesn't only have to deal with their own personal, biases, but also there's the bias of the publication that you're writing for, or the TV station that you work for, and so on. There's editor's bias, there's the owner's bias, there's a whole bunch of mediations of bias that you have to deal with. It's not just the journalist. I wish it was just the journalist. Journalists work for institutions. Institutions have their own feet stuck in their own kind of clay of money, of influence, power, political views, and so on. We shouldn't be, I think, too quick to blame journalists themselves. This is a system of that is very complicated. how, as it were, truth is produced of a kind. Personally, when I go and write a story, like when I report from a place that's difficult to understand, Syria, for instance, or Egypt. I mean, these are the two kinds of countries that, in a way, Naeem was referring to when he talked about, governments that, use the war on terror in their own way. I mean, you go in to report a story in Egypt. I was there during the 2011 uprising. So difficult to understand what's happening. I'm the kind of reporter, and thank goodness I trained as a historian. When I'm going somewhere, I always try to get my hands on a bunch of books and read them, at night, whenever I can. If you don't understand the history and the culture of a place, you can't understand its politics. Reporters today, like especially television reporters who are on rapid deadlines, they report from a real place of ignorance. Like take the case of the Ukraine reporting. Most reporters didn't bother to go and read the history of the region. I was surprised to find, I read a book like overnight because I was so fascinated, that Ukraine was part of a 400-year-old republic from about the 1400s onward. It was called the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. They elected their king. They made sure the kings were not hereditary. Fascinatingly rich cultural world where there are all kinds of languages and so on. You can't understand this Russian war unless you understand hundreds of years of history. We're not talking about like just some Putin had a bad day and he decided to send his tanks across. It's a kind of ridiculous way in which these wars are covered. And how ridiculous it is that suddenly everybody knows the colors of the Ukrainian flag. They have no idea that Palestine even has a flag, frankly. Most people, if I ask them, what are the colors of the Palestinian flag? No clue. What are the colors of the flag of the Congo? No clue. What are the colors of the Libyan flag? No clue. Iraq, it has a flag? I didn't know that. But suddenly the Ukrainian flag, and you can cover this war without any idea of the long history, the recent history. You're just like covering it as if it's quote unquote current events. And I think the density of knowledge that's needed to be a journalist is something to bring back on the table. You can't just get on the air and blab whatever you want. You got to read, you got to learn, you got to have a crash course, on the flight if you're flying to report Palestine, take a book with you, read Rosemary Sayeg's book or somebody's book on the plane, get there, be a little informed, learn about the geography, learn about the density of ethnic, histories and so on. You can't just interview somebody and say what they said. I am not one of those journalists that believe that the people on the ground, are the best people to talk to, because they also are blasted by television media and sometimes will build their own ideas based on what they see on TV. You have to interrogate things. You have to talk to people, ask them questions, not just shove a mic in their face and say how you feel, and now we have a Ukrainian voice, so that's that. And all kinds of bigoted ideas can come onto the air, and that should not be where the reporter stops. A reporter isn't a null set, just a kind of conduit from the people to other people. There's got to be mediations. And some of those mediations are wretched. The mediations of money, of power, arms dealers, all of that stuff, wretched. But we have to have a responsibility of trying to educate, illuminate, communicate, and so on. And that means having a sense of the history, the culture, the limitations, all of that. I could argue that this war that's taking place now didn't start in 2022, didn't start in 2014. It has hundreds of years of animosities between Moscow, the Grand Duchy of Moscow, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Who knows? There are these older tap roots that play a role. And I must say, and I'll end here, is that we are awfully embarrassed to talk about long histories. When we talk about long histories, it's as if we are saying we are condemned to keep repeating them. just because we are worried about this idea that we're condemned to keep repeating them, those of us who come from older societies, where they've had unbroken histories, where the history was not destroyed fully by, either colonialism or immense, huge migrations and so on. I think we have to face up to the reality that there are old histories at play. In India, for instance, the BJP government in power now isn't just a government that emerged out of the massacre in Gujarat in 2002 or the creation of the RSS, the fascistic group in 1925. There are old histories that go back hundreds of years, and all these things have to be on the table, and journalists have to illuminate stories, not just tell you what to think. And I think that's why, like this Ukraine conflict, journalism has failed it, and particularly Western journalism. There's so little that's illuminating and so much that's about, essentially the flag of Ukraine. And I think that doesn't help anybody.
Thank you. We've got some questions in the crowd, and then we'll move to our online questions.
All right, thank you so much. So I actually...
Hello, who are you?
Excuse me, I keep on forgetting. My name is Obakeng.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too, and thank you so much for the opportunity of being here. The first time I read the book, one of my key points of appreciation about it is the fact that I'm very interested in de-colonial theory, and I've read a wide range of scholars on the issue, and I sort of began to have a little bit of a more nuanced understanding of why it is that despite the formal dismantling of colonial regimes, we still see colonial realities replicating themselves. But the one issue that I guess I had was that in as much as I had something of a coherent theoretical understanding of the phenomenon of coloniality, right, which is basically colonization without the colonizer, I had little, there was a lack of historical depth that I think your book offers, right? Because much of what you talk about in the book is post the Washington Consensus, right? And that gives a little bit more understanding to those of us who come and try to theorize why is it that politics is playing out the way it is. But the really big point of appreciation that I had is that so I can say, this is what the phenomenon of coloniality is. Case in point, I can refer to your book and show the inner workings of this phenomenon that we call coloniality, that Mignolo, Maldonado Torres, and several other thinkers are talking about. I think that the other point that I thought was quite important, which you actually point to in the book, is the importance of the church in terms of the hegemony that will either be for or against these imperial and colonial powers that that you're discussing in the book. Something that a lot of people don't think about is the nuances of the war of ideas that happened within the church. And I think what I especially appreciate is, people will then understand, have a better understanding of, for an example, the murder of Oscar Romero and several other theologians in South America and how they're connected to the pink tide. I think the one thing that I kind of want to, as a last comment, point to is the tensions that arose post Vatican II within the Catholic Church, right, between the theologians of the Medellin Conference, right, and the Vatican itself, where Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI, was actually leading the charge against liberation theologians, right? First being Gustavo Gutierrez, and the second one, which was the most recent one that shocked the theological community, being that of John Sobrino, who basically what actually happened was the ecumenical the Third World ecumenical theologians came together, and they literally wrote a response to that, which shows that these ideas that you are actually talking about, really from I don't know if I should say a military standpoint, they start as a war about words. And then from being a war about words, it then becomes actual bullets, weapons. And I think, what I really, really appreciate about this book is the fact that those of us who are, who take seriously Amilcar Cabral when he talks about the weapon of theory, right? We then get something that gives us historical grounding on the theories that we're working on in terms of understanding this phenomenon of imperialism as it is unfolding, and coloniality as we're experiencing it. Thank you very much for this book, and also for the book launch.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, my name is Sinkosa Pila Fortune. Can you hear me? Oh, okay, cool. Okay, yeah, so my name is Sinkosa Pila Fortune Mahale. I'm a boy from the Dusty Street of Mpumalanga. So mine is very easy. I just want to ask, there's a question that I think I didn't get your name quite well, sir. But, sorry? Naeem, okay. So my question focuses on the economy of South Africa. So I just want to pose this question, Gorin. Okay, so like I just pen everything down so that I can have the exact question that I want to ask. So, like, is there a way that SA can reach those heights, to similar to Arabic countries? We have minerals like gold, diamonds, and also bronze. So, we have seen countries like Arabic, because I do believe what they've done it in our lifetime. So, what are our barriers, and what could we do to maximize our resources? So what triggered me about what you talked about, because you spoke about Jeff Bezos and also Elon Musk, which it quite well also can concur with you. But my question, because I focus on the future, like the South African future. So my thing, like the question that I pose right now, I just want to understand more in terms of like, because I still believe what hinders us as like South Africa, and especially like the South African government, not to actually do what the Arabic done in our lifetime, because they were able, like in terms of history, the Americans were only like, I think like 50% of oil, but they were able like to also claim back the economy. Now I think they're only like 100% of oil. Like we are, everybody, we are seeing it right now in our lifetime. There's Dubai and everything. So basically they're able to conquer their economy. So my question I want to ask, what hinders us as South African to also do the same thing? Because I still do believe we own the resources, and yeah, I don't want to go much more, because I just want to keep it concise. I feel like the question actually display everything what I'm asking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Naeem. A complex question, but I'm sure you'll give us some interesting kind of thoughts towards the answer. There's another question. Oh. Okay. Is this for Vijay or Naeem?
Both.
Both. There we go. 2 for 1. Let's go.
My name is Namatam Sangla, and yeah, this is my first book launch with you guys. I've never actually heard of you guys before, but I'm very, I'd say it's inquisitive to hear how you guys are thinking about these topics. With that being said, we live in a society where these things are happening, right? And we can explain these themes and go into the radicalness of each topic, but it has a layer to it, and it's the humanitarian part of it all, right? Where we're seeing all of these things happen, and it's happening to a group of certain people, right? And what you said, what's his name? So sorry. Naeem, yeah, so sorry, sir. About the masses having power. Now, the masses having power is a good thing, right? But it just shows that this group of smaller people, minority people over us, have power over us. What can we do with these things that you're telling us, these theories, these conspiracy theories? How can we apply them practically so that we're actually making the change? So it's not like just this airy-fairy stuff that we're just talking about at these book launches, you know? Like, for me, it's great that, okay, we're talking about these things, yes, it's fine, but what are we doing to actually move forward in a sense where it's practical and we're seeing it in real life? You spoke a little bit about, you know, these people being assassinated at the point of transition. Now, as the masses, we have the power to actually make the change. But when we're seeing these people being assassinated, or we're seeing that, okay, we can't really make a change as an individual, what can we do to say, okay, as a 27-year-old marketing person who's in Johannesburg, in this global, I'd say, this tragedy that we're going through as a human race, what can we do to actually see the results as opposed to talking about it? Because it's all good and well to say, I spoke to a CIA agent to say, okay, this is what we're doing and how they're implementing these things. But as the mass, we have the power, yes, but how are we actually making these changes for, you know, the future generations in 10 years? I just feel like sometimes talking about it is just not enough for me. It's very much like, okay, we're talking about I'm gonna go home tonight and have my glass of wine and go to bed and go to work tomorrow, you know, and it's gonna continue, and I'm gonna sound intellectual at dinner parties and whatnot. But it's not. There's no impact. What are the practical changes as an individual who is in South Africa, who has these global impacts, these global activities happening, impacting me on the most, you know, minimal scale, but not really understanding on what a broader scale it could be, considering that if you're controlling the politics in my country, or the oil, or, you know, whatever it is, how am I going to change that for, you know, the greater extent for my kids and my grandkids, and not actually having it from Abokrisani to us? It's been years, it's been decades, but the same things are happening. So that means that we're not doing anything. We're just, you know, writing books, we're saying we're sitting here, but we're not actually making practical implementations to make a change. You know, it's very sad. And so sorry to actually drag this on, but as I said, it's like a broader theme on like the human race and what we're doing. One of the things I'm very passionate about is pollution, and we are living in it. There's cars on the road, people are smoking, all of these things are happening, and just living in it and not actually saying, okay, there's so much pollution in the air, and saying, okay, what are we doing to actually stop that? But we're okay with it because we've normalized it. We've said, okay, this is part of our life, and we're trying to survive. As Black people, we're not thinking about America taking over us. We're thinking about eating and feeding our kids and all of these things. So if we're going to be trying to make a change while trying to survive as a people, there's no actual impact, because as a mass, yes, we do have the power to make an impact, but we can't necessarily implement it to its fullest degree, because one, the education isn't really there, and two, as a mass, we're scared. We don't know what to do outside of what we've been taught and what we have been, you know, accustomed to with society and how we live. So what practical changes can we make, not only for us, but for our kids, you know, to say, okay, you've come into this world, what can you do to actually be different from what we've been doing all these years?
Thank you. I'm going to let Naeem answer the first part, and then we'll move on to Vijay.
Yes. Okay. First, let me say that not all Arab countries are the same. Not all Arab countries have oil. Not all Arab countries are rich. All right. That's first point. Second point, in terms of those that are rich, I think we should be very careful about suggesting that we want to be like them. Saudi Arabia is extremely rich. You go to the east of the country, the people who work in the major oil fields are extremely exploited. They're Saudi citizens. They're not foreigners. You go to Dubai and you go out into the desert, and there are these camps of foreign migrant workers who live virtual slave lives and are in a sense for a period of time enslaved to their bosses. That's not the kind of society we want. So wealth, the kind of obscene wealth that we see in some of these countries and in other places, has its cost. And the cost is the creation of poverty and the misery of large masses of people. That's not what we want. Okay? But we do want to be better as South Africans. We do want a better economy. But I think the first step is to redefine what that means. What are the indicators of what a better economy is for us? Does it mean that we get all anxious when our growth drops to, what is it now, less than 1%? And we haven't reached the 6% that has been set? Is growth actually something that we should be, that should be the big indicator for us? Or is the state of the poverty of our people? Are we okay with living in a country that is rich, that can display its wealth, but the vast majority of the people live in poverty, and we have the largest inequality gap in the world? So what we want is an economy that creates a country that is more egalitarian, where we don't have the obscene wealth that we see when we drive around in Sandton, etc. And we don't have the obscene poverty that we see when we cross the M1 into Alex. That's the society we want. And the way that we're dealing with our economy now is not going to produce that. The kind of neoliberal framework that we've decided to adopt, even with the kind of welfare net that we have, is not going to achieve that. And what has happened is that our erstwhile leadership has jumped on that particular gravy train and has decided that the most important thing for many of them is their own self-enrichment. Not even the enrichment of their class, but their self-enrichment. Okay? This is what we need to destroy and what we need to overturn. And so let me make a quick point about your question, because Vijay will answer it in greater detail. But I think the beginning to answer your question is being here, is moving away from the notion that I am me, and all that is important is what is around me, right? The notion of individualism. And so what is important is only how I can better myself, particularly materially. Once we have that notion, we have killed ourselves already. The idea of solidarity with other people is extremely important. Other people meaning our neighbors, but also people on the other side of the world. Because solidarity is about love, it's about compassion, it's about being at one with all other human beings. So yes, we might be concerned. If I were that person living on the other side of the M1 in Alex, I'd be concerned about my next meal and about how I'm going to feed my children, but that shouldn't dull my sense from knowing that there are others who are just as bad off, or perhaps even worse, and that we are all in this together, and we will not improve. I will not improve myself until we all improve. This sounds like one of these COVID ads. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the jingoism, but you get the point, that the beginning of the problem is an individualism that moves away from our care and concern for the rest of society. But Vijay will pick up and take it much further, I'm
Well, firstly, I just want to say that Naeem is a beautiful name. And for those of you who don't know, Naeem means something like tranquility or calm. If I'm right, Naeem, those are the
Yes.
Urdu meanings. And I think in Arabic it would be the same. Tranquility and I guess even serenity maybe. Mine is a horrible name. My name means victory, which is an illusion. I would prefer the name serenity or tranquility over victory. Victory is very far away from us. We aim for victory when the people can prevail, but we should also strive for victory in a very tranquil way. So I'm glad to be in the conversation with you, because I think our names go well together. Frankly, the issues are immense in front of us. And I think Naeem is right that nothing can be done if we try to do it alone. You just can't change anything. Mulela began today's event by talking about our friends at Abaklali based Majondolo, the shack dwellers movement, which comes out of Durban and then goes to other parts of South Africa. A movement like that is deeply inspirational to me, because here we have people gathering together, giving each other strength to fight to build a much better world, to secure housing, to secure dignity, to secure water, to secure education for children, and so on. They have to fight for every inch of space. From the first land occupation onwards, they're fighting for everything. That fight can only happen because they give each other confidence. And I think what happens a lot in our world is that mutual sense of confidence has eroded. And that's partly because the habits of being in community, political community with other people, have also eroded. These habits were imposed on the people that create Abaklali. It was imposed on them because they had to fight from survival to build those habits of community and build those habits of fellowship and trust, which then create confidence. I mean, I've seen the Abaklali, many very brave stand there when the police comes to evict them. And that bravery is not something that's, natural, as it were. It might be for some people. Some people might be disposed to bravery, but most of us are not brave people naturally. Bravery is something that gets constructed in coordination with others. I think in standing together. I've seen people in Iraq, in the middle of terrible firing and fighting and so on, provide mutual aid for each other. And they come out on the streets together to get water and so on. But they do it through providing mutual confidence. And that's the power of organization. We can't be fighting to save the world or to fix things and so on unless we are organized. We build movements. In South Africa, you have plenty of opportunities for this. You have, metal workers unions, you have Abaklali, as we've talked about it. You have a million movements there. I think we have to join our movements. We have to be members of movements. Yes, I agree, fine. We are here talking about these ideas and so on. One front of our struggle is the battle of ideas. That's a front of our struggle, how we understand the world. You can't understand the world unless you're fighting to change it. And you can't change the world unless you understand it. These things work together. They are in a tango together. Sometimes you have to meet and talk and thrash out ideas and clarify things in conversation. It's like sharpening a knife, against a stone. Conversation is a little bit like that, although I hope it's not as aggressive as that. and then, we act. And I think I very much appreciate your question about, well, look, we got to do things. But the issue is we can't do it alone. And, I again, just coming back to Molela's invocation at the beginning, you act and then people do get killed. There is a price that particularly our comrades in the working class pay in the way in which violence, is enacted to, again, remember that word confidence. Acting together gives you mutual confidence. An assassination hurts the confidence of people. And that's why these assassinations are so significant. Our friend talked earlier about decolonial thought and so on. Decolonial theory, who the greatest decolonial theory of my generation has been, theorist from the African continent? Thomas Sankara, a great decolonial theorist. You got to read Sankara. See how he was trying to, as it were, drive a country of dignity first. It's so interesting that Sankara comes to power in Upper Volta, ridiculous colonial name, north of the Volta River, Upper Volta. One of the first things Sankara does is he pushes the changing of the name of the country. And the name they chose is Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso means land of upright people. Wow. You want decolonial, you don't need to read a book published by Duke University Press to get that. Just study Sankara, you'll get it.
Thank you, Vijay. We are nearing the end of our time, but I'd like us to take 2 more questions from the in-house audience.
Hi, my name is Luando. So I haven't actually read the book, but it's such a titillating atmosphere already. I can feel from the talks that are actually within the room and the kind of questions that are actually posed. So what I actually want to say is that, Vijay, your book is actually coupled with a number of paradoxes, basically. One of which one is actually hope, and actually resistance, a kind of transgressiveness in terms of how to look into the future. With the other one, which is actually worry. And by worry, I mean the question that was actually posed right now as to what exactly and where to from now. So I'm saying this because I feel like your book is actually unfolding in such a way that, I haven't read the whole book, but the conversation already, it's unfolding in such a way that it actually brings about a kind of resistance to me in particular, because it actually exposes there's a kind of assassinations that are particularly happening, and the kind of demoralization that actually is actually happening within the movements. And for that, I would actually applaud you for it, that it really exposes the kind of nitty-gritties that are quite essential in terms of understanding how to keep about the motioning of these particular movements. But what also scares me about the book is that what then happens from here? Where to from here? These are the kind of questions that basically linger in my mind right now. Thus, I'm left with lingering thoughts of archiving. Also, what the other thought that actually came into my mind right now is the thought of archiving. What kind of contribution are you trying to make with this kind of book, and how do you actually centralize your book within the context of Africa, and particularly South Africa, because the geographic that we actually settled in right now is a South African context where a lot of people are actually South African. The other thing that I actually want to say to you is, since also there's been a lot of assassinations and attempts basically of this assassination that are largely of disservice to the movements, bring about the slow motions, what kind of then archiving do you actually cling into when these kind of people, I mean in terms of reporting as a journalist, when these kind of people and kind of movements are actually demoralized, not only demoralized, but also there's a kind of slow motion that has actually happened as a result of this kind of transitioning that I would assume, quote unquote, ostensibly failing in particular. How do you also ensure that you assume also a position that is not harmful but central to the narrativization and the narratives of these particular movements, whose people become a part of this assassination behavior by the imperialists. I know I've posed a lot of questions, but hopefully you'll be able to capture that. Thank you.
Vijay? That was quite a long question. I think it might be easier for him to answer that one first and then come back.
Hello, everyone. It's Zolisa here.
We'll come to you in a moment. We'll just let him finish this one. Go ahead.
Okay. I mean, it's an incredible series of observations, really. I mean, I want to say that I'm looking forward to having you read the book, because I think that I'd like to hear what you think of it, because one of the modes that I was keen on was maybe not hope and worry, but you know, some form of illumination, which could include worry and hope. And what I tried to do as an exercise is to pepper the book with a lot of poetry. I'm a great admirer of paintings and poetry, the two of them. I think that they lift up the human spirit in a way that photography and prose don't. And I don't want to get into a debate on this, but that's just my personal opinion. And I thought, therefore, that lifting up the human spirit through putting poetry inside the narrative might be a way to go. The book is filled with poetry. It's a slim book, but there's a lot of poems in there. And the reason I like poetry is poetry takes language and makes it, like James Baldwin said, makes it as hard as a diamond. Poet distills, takes liquid and evaporates the unnecessary and distills the essential. And there is a way in which a poem makes the reader stop and reflect and spend time. And I think there is a way, I mean, I'm just talking about a method that I feel that this kind of reading does. There is a way in which a reader, when you are forced to stop in the middle of a narrative and focus on a poem or on a image in a poem or even an image in the text, that pause, that stop, I think is where you're trying to get the reader to inculcate the possibility of something different. When you read like a potboiler novel and read all the way to the end, you don't have to have a pause. You just sort of let the narrative carry you away like a flash flood, just sort of taking you away to the sea. Here, there are dams where you stop and have to reflect and pause and so on. And I think that act of forcing the reader to stop and pause and encounter the immensity of the emotion of a poem is very important for me as an exercise in the way I put the book together. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Least of all, the price of milk. Well, books like this are intended as educational. I don't write books to make money, or I don't write books for fame or anything like that. I write books basically with the feeling that I want to build, I want the book to be a participant in the building of movements. I think of books like that. Books are there to build communities. They are not commodities. They are not just to sell. We want to build movements. We want to change the world. A book is just an instrument in that, one modest front in a very large struggle that we're engaged in. The other day, Efemia and I are part of a project. We are making a little free book on Ruth First. Some of her writings, which will be out on the 17th of August, the date of her assassination. And I went back and was reading bits and pieces of Ruth First's life, and I was struck by how much energy the ANC put into the writing of both Nelson Mandela's No Easy Walk to Freedom, 1966, I believe, and Oliver Tambo's book, something also Freedom, 1967. Ruth first worked in the team to work with them to put those books together. They put a lot of effort into those books. Here are people, they are in prison and so on. They are in the middle of a serious battle against a wretched system. And they're spending all this time putting together these books. Why? It made me reflect on how important for our movement all these fronts are, including, the book that makes you sit and read and get absorbed into a movement, get absorbed into your own capacity to be involved in a movement and so on. That's what that's why we hold these things, we do the things we do, is to introduce you to the possibility that you don't have to be a spectator to history, but you can actually be a protagonist in it. And I very much hope that those who read books like this, decide to get involved in things.
Thanks, Vijay. Our final contributor?
Hi, everyone. My name is Zulisa Silolo. Acha Maxhosa. Umbengo omde iyawushisa umlilo, which basically translates to, I'm not going to be long, I'm just going to be brief. So, adding on to whatever Ubongani said right now, earlier on actually, how would you, Mr. Prashad, describe the fourth estate as in the current status quo?
Wow, that's a great last question, Efemia. Look, there's something miserable happening, okay, frankly. I think the attempt to silence media outlets in the middle of this war is absolutely incredibly dangerous. The shutting down of RT, for instance, in various jurisdictions, Britain, Canada, United States, parts of Europe, Australia, and so on. The attempt to liquidate RT is incredibly dangerous. I was not in Baghdad until deep into that conflict, but I remember very well, and I remember seeing the remains of his clothing and so on when I visited Al Jazeera Arabic in Doha, Qatar. When the United States went into Baghdad in that hideous, horrible war of 2003, illegal war, as Kofi Annan put it, of 2003, the war that I will say that the South African people opposed, like many people around the world. There was a reporter from Al Jazeera reporting from the Palestine Hotel. And it's interesting. A US tank squadron entered the street in front of the Palestine. Tariq was a reporter saying what he was seeing in Iraq, in Baghdad, from I think the 6th or 7th floor of the Palestine Hotel. The US Abrams tank stopped in front of the hotel. The tank lifted its gun up to the 7th floor and fired directly at the room of an Al Jazeera reporter, killing him. That was an assassination, the early part of the Iraq war, and I think largely forgotten now. But if you go to the Al Jazeera Arabic headquarters in Qatar, as you enter, you have his blood-stained clothes, his flak jacket and so on there. Why am I saying this story? Because, this attack on the press that's taking place now, they said Al Jazeera basically was pro-Saddam or this or that or the other terrorist organization. Right through the war on terror, Al Jazeera was reporting very well on the black sites and so on. And the US government said a terrorist organization, tried to shut them down, put pressure on the Emir of Qatar and so on. I find this very dangerous, the closing down of Russia Today and RT as it's known. I find this very dangerous. It's a very disturbing attack on the press. Whatever you think of the coverage RT was doing, you don't like their coverage, don't watch it. You don't like their coverage, provide other coverage. But this is not the way to go. I'm finding this very disturbing. the coverage taking place in the Western media outlets, as I've already mentioned, is extraordinarily flat. They are not reporting the complexity of what's happening at all. In the same way as, I must say, they didn't report the complexities in Libya at all. Basically, Western media outlets were following what the Saudi royal family was telling them to report. So was the United Nations, to its eternal shame, on Libya in particular. There was complexity there. It was very clear what was happening. And simple thing, like at the time, Jacob Zuma was part of the African Union delegation that went to Tripoli to meet Gaddafi. Gaddafi said, I agree to the ceasefire. Then their plane from the African Union went to Benghazi. They met Mahmoud Jibril and others. They rejected the ceasefire. That was not reported in the Western press at all, that the rebels rejected the ceasefire. They rejected the ceasefire because they wanted Western jets to smash Gaddafi's infrastructure so they could win the war. That was against the UN Security Council mandate. CNN didn't report that. Nobody, none of them. There is something miserable in the way the media functions, particularly at a time of war. And the fact that we let them get away with killing journalists, like Tariq was killed in 2003, it just emboldens them. Between the killing of Tariq from Al Jazeera in 2003, Saeed Nimr killed in New Baghdad city by the helicopter. Julian Assange's WikiLeaks released the video of that. It's called Collateral Murder. I invite you to go look at it. Saeed worked for Reuters, a Western news agency, murdered by the United States. No justice for him or his family. During war, the West is not the great champion of the press, I'd have you know. And right now, the suffocating of other voices, it's going really far and it's chilling. And the fact that private companies like YouTube are throwing people off the air, be careful. It could be you, it could be me, it could be all of us tomorrow. There's a chorus of opinion on this war, and a chorus of opinion is never a good idea.
Thank you, Vijay, and thank you for all of your questions. It's been a lively and stimulating evening. I know you all have loved ones, whether they are plants or people or animals, to go home to, so I'll keep my little bit brief. I just want to tell you a little bit about Inkani Books, which is our new press. We are a left progressive press, and we are hoping to provide good ideas and new interventions into many of the problems facing South Africa today. Some of our upcoming releases this year are Tell No Lies, Claim No Easy Victories, which is a selection of Amilcar Cabral's works, some of which have not appeared in English before, and some of which are out of print. We are also publishing Shoot to Kill, Policing and Power in South Africa, which is a radical abolitionist text and which encourages us to think about safety in our society. And we are also doing a Zulu translation of The Wretched of the Earth by Frans Fanon, which will be the first translation of Fanon into an African language. And we have many more exciting things coming, so please continue to be part of these conversations. Please continue coming. Please continue thinking. Please don't give up hope, and we'd love to take you on this journey with us. I'd like to thank Vijay, and I'd like to thank Naeem. Our two wonderful speakers this evening. I'd also like to thank my colleagues at Tricontinental, The Forge and The Commune for organizing the wine and the seats and the lights and everything. And I hope you pick up a copy of the book. Have a good evening. Thank you so much for coming.